So Mastodon is in the news again, and unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know why. Elon Musk recently took over Twitter, and it's no secret that the ship seems to be sinking. And so basically everybody that's using Twitter right now is pretty much convinced that Twitter is doomed, and so they're looking for a new alternative. And Mastodon has been around for a while, and its number one claim to fame is that it's just a Twitter clone. And Mastodon is part of the fediverse, which is basically social media without the centralized companies. So it's not owned by one giant megacorporation. With the fediverse, you can have a Twitter-like experience, but you can allow people to host their own instance on their own server. So if you want right now, you can host your own version of Mastodon on your own server, and people can sign up and use your server and connect to other Mastodon servers. So you can connect with people all across the internet without it having to be controlled by one company. And that appeals to a lot of people because the problems of centralized social media is no secret. For example, maybe you don't like the creepy tracking and selling of your user data to advertisers. Well, that's just part of the model with centralized social media. And maybe you don't like the fact that you got banned from Twitter, your favorite celebrity got banned from Twitter. You want to have your own Mastodon server where you can say whatever you want. Well, Mastodon also solves this problem. You can just start your own server. And when Mastodon was brand new, everyone inside the free and open source software community was going crazy about this. Finally, we have a new alternative to social media, so we get social media without all of the bad stuff. Sign me up. And so back in the day, you could find all kinds of Linux channels defiantly deleting their Twitter account and signing up for Mastodon instead. But I never ended up signing up for Mastodon, and that's because there's just one problem with this entire idea. Mastodon is still social media. And to me, I think that's the main problem. So, you might think that the main problem is that they're centralized. You don't think that these social media platforms should treat their users as products to be sold to companies for advertising. But in my opinion, that doesn't capture the bigger picture. So I've always believed that social media is useless at best and actively harmful at worst. I don't think there's ever been anything of value to really be found on social media. And I know because I used to use Twitter for years before I finally closed my account. And Twitter is a place where you feel like you're being productive because you're keeping abreast of current events. And you're part of a community of people discussing important topics. That's how it seems, and that's why a lot of people join these kind of platforms. But of course, the reality is a little bit different. And specifically in this video, I'm going to be talking about Mastodon and Twitter, but a lot of it applies to other fediverse social media. So in the fediverse, there are decentralized alternatives to Facebook as well. There's Instagram alternatives, and those have their own problems, but I'm going to be primarily talking about Mastodon and Twitter because that's what everybody's talking about. So let's talk about Mastodon. My main problem with Twitter, and by extent Mastodon, is the method of communication. So you might have heard the medium is the message before. What that's saying is the way that people communicate on these platforms is kind of more important than what they're talking about. And the medium of Twitter is exclusively for short form content. And it makes it nearly impossible to publish anything meaningful on it. So first off, there's the character limit. It's a 240 character limit. And I think Mastodon increases it by a little bit, but you're still very limited in how much you can say in a single post. And Twitter and Mastodon also have an extreme recency bias. So you're only really going to see the most recent posts that people make. If you make a tweet, or a toot is what it's called in Mastodon's case. If you make a toot and it's more than a day old, it's basically not going to be seen by anybody ever again. And so with this system, you're not really incentivized to put together thoughtful, meaningful content. There's a reason why Twitter and Mastodon is constantly obsessed with current events. Because when you have a system like this, political drama and celebrity gossip become the most important things in the world. And anyone can share a surface level opinion just by typing something in and hitting enter. The barrier to writing something is very low, so you're just going to get people's first knee-jerk reaction to any given subject. You're not going to have people sit down and want to, I want to get all the facts before I make a tweet on this subject. They're not going to do their research like they would with something like a blog post. And these insignificant issues that they're talking about most of the time just aren't worth turning into a full blog post. So what you're going to see most of the time with this short form content, you're going to see the most reductive posts and very few clear-headed thoughts. So this is a problem that you see with Twitter, and Mastodon just doesn't fix the problem. And let's face it, the type of content that people post on Twitter is really nothing important. And the only reason that people actually read these thoughts on Twitter is because of the network effect. So now you can read everyone's thoughts in one place. But the thing is, if these thoughts were posted somewhere else other than Twitter or Mastodon, nobody would care about what they had to say. The only reason that posts on Twitter matter is because likes and retweets artificially give these thoughts more importance than they really deserve. And just as an example, let's look at Donald Trump. Everyone knows what happened with him and Twitter. He got kicked off of Twitter, and he no longer had a platform to share his thoughts. And what a lot of people don't know is that after this, he actually created his own microblogging service just for himself on his own website called From the Desk of Donald Trump. But this was shut down in just a couple of months because nobody actually cared about it. Most content written on Twitter is complete nonsense. The only reason people read it is because Twitter gives you an endless stream of nonsense that I guess serves as a way to pass the time. And if Donald Trump really had something of value to say via microblogging, then the deplatforming wouldn't have hurt nearly as much as it did. If his tweets were actually insightful and nuanced takes, then he would have been fine. People would have still come to his website if it was important enough. And another thing is, most people don't have anything important to say. And a lot of people talk about Twitter as democratizing media by giving everyone a voice. Wow, that sounds really nice, but the only thing that Twitter really does is give a platform for people to blurt out the first thing that pops into their mind. And most people don't have any unique or interesting thoughts. That's just the reality of the situation. So if you don't have any unique or interesting thoughts, you just end up repeating what everybody else says. There's a reason why the NPC meme came from Twitter originally, because people on Twitter just repeat what everybody else is saying, like a pre-programmed response in a video game. And by lowering the barrier of entry for people who want to have a voice, you would think that it allows everyone to share their own unique voice. But as it turns out, most people don't have anything interesting to say, so they just end up going with the flow. And Twitter allows you to delude yourself into thinking that you actually have something important to say. Of course, Mastodon doesn't solve this problem either. But with all that being said, probably the most common complaint that most normal people have about social media is just how addictive it is. So, in the past few years, more and more people have become aware of this. It's no secret anymore how difficult it is just to not compulsively check social media all the time. And this is no accident because social media companies like Twitter have a very real financial incentive to keep you on their platform as long as possible. So the longer you stare at their website or their app, the more advertising dollars they get. And so the designers that work at these companies, they know this, and they intentionally make the platforms as addictive as they can. They try to keep the engagement up and keep you on the website as long as they can by any means necessary. And so some people give Mastodon a little bit of props for this because, okay, the timeline isn't controlled by an algorithm, it's just in chronological order. So in theory, there would be an end to the timeline, so you don't necessarily have to spend all day on it. But just some features that you wouldn't even think about, like maybe infinite scrolling. It sounds pretty useful. You scroll down to the bottom of the page and you don't have to click next page. It just keeps loading it for you. But what this does is it just makes it easier to spend more time on the app. You're not really consciously thinking. You're just getting more content to consume. And if you just look at the layout of Mastodon, they've just copied so much of Twitter without even thinking about it. They have an explore page, they have trending topics, they have likes and retweets and replies. They have notifications so you can see when somebody likes or favorites your post. And just the entire nature of Twitter as a platform just makes it extremely addictive. And so just like Twitter, you're constantly checking Mastodon to see if there's any new funny content. You're scrolling through all your feeds. And if you really wanted to completely reinvent Twitter or microblogging to be less addictive, then you would basically have to redesign the entire thing from the ground up, which is not what they've done with Mastodon. So if one of the things that you don't like about Twitter is that it's addictive and you're constantly checking it more than you think you should, well, Mastodon is not going to solve that problem. And finally, I just think that the very term social media is kind of a misnomer. Social media isn't social, and one of the things that people like about Mastodon more than Twitter is the community. The community is so much nicer on Mastodon than Twitter. They're not as toxic as Twitter. You can find your own community. And whenever Mark Zuckerberg goes up on stage and tells everyone that his product is bringing people together, everyone knows that it's a lie. But people still believe that you can find true connection on social media like Mastodon. Social media has never done anything but bring people further apart, and so now you can get the dopamine of social interaction without actually going out in real life and talking to anyone. And it feels good at the moment, but you end up even more socially isolated and depressed in the end. The people who spend the most time on social media should be the most connected, but everybody knows that these people are the most neurotic and antisocial in real life. Everybody knows a terminally online person. And even the smallest thing that you do in real life is going to be more meaningful than liking 100 posts on Mastodon. So by now you might be wondering, what do we use instead? If I don't like Mastodon, what's the alternative? If you really want a good decentralized platform, the best way I can think of is just to create your own website. I have my own website so I can write my thoughts the way that I want to. Social media forces you to think in a very specific way, and I think that it's ultimately been a total failure at doing everything it set out to do. And I don't think creating endless new, better social media platforms will fix the problem, because I think the very idea has been bad from the start. And so I've never cared about decentralized social media, because it's never addressed my main issues with the entire idea. And most of the people that have been around since the early days of the internet, everybody knows that the internet these days is much worse than it used to be, but they're still trying to fix social media instead of just tossing the entire concept. So if you really miss the old internet, create your own website, create content that you would like to read, and amplify others who are doing the same. It's that easy, and you don't need a Mastodon instance in order to do that. And I think that the real decentralized internet, where you have your own website and you can say things the way that you want to say them, I think that will be around long after social media disappears.